A cold wind blew from the plain. The woods were dark, without any rustling of leaves, without any of those vague and fresh coruscations of summer. Great branches drew themselves up fearfully. Mean and shapeless bushes whistled in the glades. The tall grass wiggled under the north wind like eels. The brambles twisted about like long arms seeking to seize their prey in their claws. Some dry weeds, driven by the wind, passed rapidly by and appeared to flee with dismay before something that was following. The prospect was dismal. Darkness makes the brain giddy. Man needs light. Whoever plunges into the opposite of day feels his heart chilled. When the eye sees blackness, the mind sees trouble. In an eclipse, in night, in the sooty darkness, there is anxiety even to the strongest. Nobody walks alone at night in the forest without trembling. You feel something hideous, as if the soul were amalgamating with the shadow. This penetration of the darkness is inexpressibly dismal for a child. Forests are apocalypses, and the beating of wings of a little soul makes an agonizing sound under their monstrous vault. Without being conscious of what she was experiencing, Cosette felt that she was seized by this black enormity of nature. It was not mere terror that held her, but something more terrible even than terror. She shuddered. Words failed to express the peculiar strangeness of that shudder which chilled her through and through. Her eye had become wild. She felt that perhaps she would be compelled to return there at the same hour the next night. Then, by a sort of instinct, to get out of this singular state which she did not understand, but which terrified her, she began to count aloud, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10. And when she had finished, she began again. This restored her to a real perception of things about her. Her hands, which she had wet in drawing the water, felt cold. She arose. Her fear had returned, a natural and insurmountable fear. She had only one thought, to fly with all her might across the woods, across fields, to houses, to windows, to lighted candles. Her eyes fell upon the bucket that was before her. Such was the dread with which the Thénardiers inspired her that she did not dare to go without the bucket of water. She grasped the handle with both hands. She could hardly lift the bucket.
She went a dozen steps in this manner, but the bucket was full. It was heavy. She was compelled to rest it on the ground. She breathed an instant, then grasped the handle again and walked on, this time a little longer. But she had to stop again. After resting a few seconds, she started on. She walked, bending forward, her head down, like an old woman. The weight of the bucket strained and stiffened her thin arms. The iron handle was numbing and freezing her little wet hands. From time to time she had to stop, and every time she stopped, the cold water that splashed from the bucket fell upon her naked knees. This took place in the depth of a wood, at night, in the winter, far from all human sight. It was a child of 8 years. There was none but God at that moment who saw this sad thing, and undoubtedly her mother, alas, for there are things which open the eyes of the dead in their grave. She breathed with a kind of mournful rattle. Sobs choked her, but she did not dare to weep, so fearful was she of the Thénardiers even at a distance. She always imagined that the Thénardiers was near. However, she could not make much headway in this manner, and she was getting along very slowly. She tried hard to shorten her resting spells and to walk as far as possible between them. She remembered with anguish that it would take her more than an hour to return to Montfermeil thus, and that the Thénardiers would beat her. This anguish added to her dismay at being alone in the woods at night. She was worn out with fatigue and was not yet out of the forest. Arriving near an old chestnut tree which she knew, she made a last halt, longer than the others, to get well rested. Then she gathered all her strength, took up the bucket again, and began to walk on courageously. Meanwhile, the poor little despairing thing could not help crying, "Oh, my God, my God!" At that moment she felt all at once that the weight of the bucket was gone. A hand, which seemed enormous to her, had just caught the handle and was carrying it easily. She raised her head. A large, dark form, straight and erect, was walking beside her in the gloom. It was a man who had come up behind her and whom she had not heard. This man, without saying a word, had grasped the handle of the bucket she was carrying. There are instincts for all the crises of life. The child was not afraid.